Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini. Welcome to episode number 166 of WIP Wednesday, which is my weekly live. We are actually having a little bit of a demo / tutorial on a quilt block. It's been a while since we've touched on quilting stuff, so we're going to hit that up in a second. First, let's make sure that y'all can see me and hear me, so let me know in the chat box where you are tuning in from, and just let me know that you can see me and hear me. Let's say hi to some friends that we see tuning in live here. Hi, Patricia from Tucson, Arizona. Hi, Grace tuning in from Long Island, New York. Hey, Barb from San Diego. Hi, Gail tuning in from Melbourne, Australia. It's tomorrow over there for her. Laura from Northern Virginia. Hi, Joanne. Another one from Arizona. Yeah, Windless Original says 166. Can you imagine? So many episodes. We've been at this for years now. Hi, Zena. Let's see. She's tuning in from down the street somewhere here in our same town. So hi, neighbor. Linda, Laura, hi, Mari, tuning in from the UK. Great. Thank you, Josie. She says she can hear me in Washington. All right, Doris in the house too. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's shoot well, first, in case anybody asks, I am wearing my cropped version of the Jolie Laurent cropped version of the crew neck sweatshirt. In case anybody's wondering, some of you might recognize this fabric because I have a cardigan that I made out of this one too. Which cardigan was it? Do you remember? You probably don't. Somebody else is going to chime in. If Margie's on here, I know she knows. Hi, Margie. Not the Helene. It was the other one, the longer, kind of Grandpa Cardi style one. I don't remember. Anyway, the pattern for this, I do have a step-by-step video course, and this one is the one that you can do a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, cropped, long, and then also the hoodie with the kangaroo pocket. So it has all those different versions in the one pattern. If you want to check that out, you can check it out on our website. Okay. Let's go ahead and give everybody my over-the-shoulder camera shot here because I want to talk about briefly, just to point out two things before we jump into today's demo. Okay? Let's see. All right, good. Here we are. So this is the block that we're going to be doing. But before I get into this, let me just scoot this aside for now. Real quick reminder, I know we are at the end of February. This is February 2025 for anybody that's watching in the future. We did a sew along this month for the Sew Together bag, which is this project here, super handy. The designer is Michelle at So Demented. We have sold out right now of the hard copy patterns, but if you click the link to sign up for my step-by-step video course for the Sew Together bag, by the way, it features 16 different step-by-step video lessons. So I break everything down into super bite-sized pieces. The description page, if you want to sign up and you're a visual learner for the video course, has two links there. One, taking you back to our shop to buy the hard copy pattern, which, like I just said, right now, at the time that I'm going live, we're sold out. But there's also a link on where you can purchase the PDF pattern from the designer herself, okay? So if you do want to sign up for my video course, I'm mentioning this even though we're at the end of the month, it is because the course, my video course, is still on sale for 2 more days. So even if you don't participate in the sew along, you can log in once you sign up for the course and access the 2 live question and answer sessions that I did earlier this month. Those will always be posted in the course there for you to watch the replay whenever. So I just wanted to plug that and let y'all know that there's 2 more days left for the course on sale. So it's $10 off the regular price right now. And I did include a link in the description box of this video if you're watching on YouTube. I know it's also in the caption if you're watching on Facebook. This is the pattern. So you can purchase the PDF from Michelle. We'll surely get some more in stock, but I can't say when right now. Like, I'm not sure when I'm going to be reordering. But I did want to share with y'all the progress on mine. Those of you that tuned in for the last Q&A, we were talking all about zippers and lining and some of the construction steps, but you can see that I already went ahead and attached my binding to the 2 sides. And this was me grabbing just random scraps. These fabrics are just leftover stuff from my stash. They are not from a matching collection or anything, but I was happy that I was able to find this little bit of this fabric, and I think it goes really well to pull the pinks from this gray print. And then this is the main zipper that I'm going to use, like the zipper that goes here. So I'm really happy with the way that turned out, and I think in past weeks I've shared with y'all my fabric choices. So for those of you that didn't sign up for the class and weren't on those live question and answer sessions, I just wanted to show you how those fabrics that I selected have come together. Oh yeah, the fun pop of color. Let me show you. Isn't that cute? And there's little bits of yellow in this gray print, like orangish, an orangey yellow, so a few pops. So I thought I'd use this kind of tonal floral here to bring that out with white zippers. I think it goes really well with that inside lining. So anyways, this is going to be another sew together bag that I'm making. And again, if you want to sign up for that video course, look how cute that's going to look. The course is $10 off just for a couple more days this week, okay? Second thing that also is time sensitive. These are mini accordion wallets. And this is the course that we have on flash sale this week right now over at craftygemini.com/shop. Again, the link is in the video description of this video and also in the Facebook caption for those of you on Facebook. If you want to learn how to make this mini wallet, it's an accordion mini wallet, super cute, simple, fits cards, cash, whatever you want to throw in here that's relatively flat, right? You can put them in the little pockets and the closure is just a simple snap. Now, this is a great way for those of you that want to make more complex wallets, which I have an entire wallet club, like a wallet of the month club with different wallet projects, and there's video courses for all of them. You can do a quick search for that on my site in the shop as well. Just look up wallet club. This is a great way to kind of get into the construction, three-dimensional type things of making things that have pockets and closures without needing to install really any metal hardware or zippers. So this little mini accordion wallet is a great one. Look how cute that looks. And as you can imagine, a great scrap buster. This is another version. And so for just this week only, this video course is $10 off as well. So the link again is below. Check it out, and you got 2 more days if you want to sign up and save $10 off the video course. Yes, Laura says I'm making one of those this weekend, and Winless Original says the accordion wallet is a fun make. Thank you all. Thank you. Oh, Susie says it's her favorite. Awesome. Well, thank you, thank you. I did go ahead and include a bunch, not a bunch, but maybe like 8 pictures of different wallets that other students have made in the past. That way you can see, I included a couple of testimonials. A lot of beginners say that they were surprised that they were able to make this with the help of my step-by-step video course. So definitely check it out. The links for that are below. All right, so now let's move on to our disappearing 4-patch block. For those of us that are quilters or want to be quilters, this is a great beginner project, and I thought that I would use my Crafty Gemini 5" by 10" ruler as a way to show you that this is not just good to use as a regular ruler for smaller size pieces that we're cutting out, but also we're kind of going to use it as a template. Okay, 5" by 10". So a lot of the blocks that you see out there, especially like basic 4-patch blocks, they usually will call for you to use pre-cut squares that are 5" by 5", which is great. But if you're a little bit of a perfectionist and precision is really key to you, you may have realized that those pre-cut stacks don't always come cut at the exact same size. So although we would like to just open up a pre-cut stack and start using them, you can. But if it bothers you that things don't match up and they're not all the exact size, meaning your intersecting points here may not all match up perfectly, unless you go through and trim down all those squares to a proper size and then use them, you may want to check out this method that I'm going to show you here, because I'm a big, big fan of using up yardage that I have without having to purchase, you know, one of those pre-cut stacks that has a whole collection in it. I feel like maybe when they first started coming out with the pre-cuts, there was a good variety in there in terms of lights, darks, small, medium, large scale prints. And so it was enough of a variety that I could kind of play around with them. But I feel like over the years, they haven't all had the same type of standard in terms of what kind of stuff they're including in there. Sometimes I'll get a stack that has just like a lot of just middle range stuff, and I'm not getting that high contrast that I often like. Y'all know that I don't really do color theory and all that stuff. I just go with what my eyes like, and I usually tell y'all that regardless of the color, and this is just how I pick fabrics for my quilt projects, regardless of the colors or the texture, the design, or whatever, the way that I combine fabrics is I like the visual interest that I get when I match up 2 fabrics that are going to be obviously sewn next to each other. So you're going to be looking at them at the same time. I want one to play as the light and one to play as the dark. And if I can say light and dark like within a second of looking at the fabrics together, then I know that that's going to have enough visual interest for me to want to use it in a quilt block. Okay, so this is pretty obvious, but I think it's a good way for me to demonstrate what I mean. Obviously, this pale cream, it has like a couple of tiny little geometric designs in it. This kind of plays as a solid for me because it's practically all solid. So this for sure, next to this purple print, is the light. Okay, and this guy, when it's next to it, is the dark. So as long as you do something like that, regardless of the color, you're going to get some really good visual interest in your quilt blocks, and they're definitely going to pop like this. So this is great for those of you that have not necessarily scraps, but maybe like smaller pieces of yardage that aren't like full yards, you may like this technique and make up a scrappy quilt using this disappearing 4-patch block, okay? So, oh, that's cute. Sam says, I use the accordion wallet daily now. Thanks for the great design, and I'm pretty sure that's Pat. Awesome. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We are starting off with 2 rectangles that measure 5 inches by 10 inches, which, surprisingly enough, is the size of the Crafty Gemini 5-inch by 10-inch ruler. We talk about this ruler a lot for cutting, for trimming, because the way that I designed it for the lines, the dashed lines are so narrow. The dashed ones, you can see clear acrylic in between them, so you can make sure that you are using that to align the fabric underneath. That way you can make sure that the piece you're cutting is exactly to size, right? Some of you, if you have a lot of rulers, you know what I'm talking about, where some rulers have the lines, even if they're solid lines, that they're kind of chunky. So behind the black line, you can't really tell if your fabric edge is on the lower edge of it, on the higher edge of it, and that little bit could mess up your overall measurements, whether it's for cutting or for piecing, okay? So I know that that can sometimes happen, and so I made sure when I designed these rulers to include really, really thin, fine lines, and then 3/4 of them are dashed, okay? The only solid lines you have here are on the full 1-inch increments. All right, so before we can get to using these guys, I'm going to show you how you would cut them down to this size out of yardage, okay? So I'm going to grab my So Tights magnetic cutting mat here, which is a dream to cut on, even if I'm not, oops, and there went my 5-inch by 10-inch ruler. My bad. It's so slick and smooth, it flew right off my table. I'll take that, sir. Thank you. Okay, so I have the 2 fabrics that I'm going to use for this next sample block, okay? Let's have a look at them. Light, dark, right? Obviously. Now, I would not recommend using a directional print for the way that we're going to piece this block. However, this is kind of like a tossed around floral that I like. I think it's going to look just fine for this block. But if you don't want your seams to kind of look like one flower is cutting into another one, even though it might be like a tossed non-directional design, then you may want to stay away from something that has a motif that you can tell it's some type of a floral or it's some type of an animal or some type of something. Because where the seams are, obviously, it's going to jump over. Don't ask me how I did this, where it literally looks like I fussy cut this and it's like keeping with the design. You see like this? Because I didn't really plan for that. But anyways, it worked out. All right. Let's see. Oh, is somebody asking about the little accordion mini wallet? If it was, yes. So Dorothy was asking if it's a part of a mini bag club or it's standalone. Just real quick, the mini accordion wallet was a part of the first Crafty Gemini mini bag club, #1. Okay, so that one is in there. So if you want to do that one and then 4 more designs, you can check out the full price bundle for those 5 courses, or you can just get this one separate. And if you already have Crafty Gemini mini bag club #1, then you have this video course in your student account already, okay? Good question. Thank you for whoever was answering in there, letting them know that it was in a previous mini bag club. All right, so here we go. I have already pressed this fabric. I opened it all the way up. I pressed it nice and flat. I'm going to take, this is a ruler that I recommend everybody have, is a long strip ruler, a 6-inch, or even some of them come 6.5. 6-inch or 6.5-inch by 24 inches is absolutely a must-have ruler. If you only could have 2 rulers and you want to get into quilting, I would recommend a long strip ruler and my 5-inch by 10-inch. With these 2, you can pretty much do everything you need to do to cut and then subcut your patchwork pieces. All right, so I am going to align any straight line on my ruler with the fold of my fabric. This is the width of the fabric, right? The way that it came off the bolt, my selvages are up here, okay? And I'm just gonna cut a sliver off to clean off this edge. So when I measure, I make sure that I have a nice straight edge. Clean. So I need to cut a 10-inch strip by the width of the fabric. So here's where I'm gonna start using my ruler. This is 5 inches by 10, so I'm gonna turn it long ways this way. I'm lining up the right side edge with that clean cut edge that I just trimmed. And then the bottom edge is right on the fold. Y'all know I slide my rulers. Not everybody does. Some of you prefer to have those grippy things on it. I don't, but I'll show you what I do. I hold it here because I want to make sure that I have 10 inches. All this distance it's easy to have this ruler be lined up correctly here, but it could be a little bit skewed this way up there. So I slide my ruler to make sure that I'm maintaining this 10-inch width here. Hold the ruler, and I slide, and I'm looking over here, making sure that the edge of my ruler is still completely aligned with that straight edge. And here I can, there we go. I just bump this ruler a hair that way, and then I slide it back down, and I do have 10 inches this way, the full length. Okay, so that's how I do it. Hi, Grace. I see that you're asking if the accordion wallet was a part of any of the clubs. It is part of the Crafty Gemini mini bag club #1. Okay, we've done 4 mini bag clubs, so the first one has that project in it. All right, so we have 10 inches by the width of the fabric. I'm going to turn this, and actually I'm going to turn my whole mat. And I'm just going to trim off the selvage edges. We don't want to have this in our project. That's just, you know, fabric information in the manufactured edge. So now, really the only reason I use a strip ruler is so that I can span the full width of the fabric. From here on out, we can really just use my 5-inch by 10-inch. So I'm going to line this here, get as close to I can to the selvage, make sure I'm taking both selvage edges with me. Line up the straight edge down here. Up top, it's nice and straight. And we're going to cut that through both layers, okay? So now that I've cut 10 inches by the width of the fabric, I cut off most of the selvage. There's a sliver there, but that'll be caught in a seam allowance, no big deal. Now I can flip this, because I'm right-handed, I flipped it. And I'm just going to use my one Crafty Gemini 5-inch by 10-inch ruler, and they are on sale right now. You can check them out in our online shop. My shop is the only place you can buy it because we make them, right? We manufacture them here in the US, and we're the only ones that sell them. We don't wholesale them out. So I'm lining up the ruler now as a template, okay? Matching up top, left, and bottom edge. That's all I need. Okay, and let me pop this up just because the fabric is a little bit dark, I see. So I'm lining it there, and I'm still, the fabric is still folded in half. So I'm cutting 2 of these guys at a time. So if you were making a quilt, that's how you would do it. Cut a bunch of these, 5 by 10. Now, the block we're working on is going to be a disappearing 4 patch, but it's coming together without using 5-inch squares. And I'll show you how. So instead, we're making it using 5-inch by 10-inch rectangles, okay? But you can see each one of these rectangles plus another one of whatever the contrasting fabric is going to give me one finished block of the disappearing 4 patch. In other words, 1 light, 1 dark equals this. Okay? So that's how you can calculate the math if you're going to be making a full quilt or you want to come up with a table runner or whatever. And you can see how little waste we end up with. You should be able to, if you're using designer quality quilting cottons, to get 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rectangles from each 10-inch by width of the fabric strip. So another 10-inch by the width of the fabric strip of the light fabric is going to yield me 8 more. And that means that combined, we will be able to get from those 10-inch strips 8 finished disappearing 4-patch blocks, okay? So let's do the same thing again. As a quick recap, we're going to do the same thing but to the light fabric. Now I'm going to fly through this one probably a little bit faster just because it's nice and straight. My strip ruler. And I'll darken this because, woo, that fabric is light. Again, a sliver off the edge here. Okay. Take my 5-inch by 10-inch. Use it sideways as a 10-inch measurement. I'm sliding, sliding, sliding all the way back down just to double check it's perfect. I walk my fingers up so that the ruler stays steady. If you keep your hand here and cut and continue to cut, it's going to be easy for that blade to go like that because you're not steadying this top part. So I walk and cut just past my fingertips. I stop with the rotary cutter and don't pick it up necessarily, but walk, walk, walk to maintain that ruler, you know, pressure on that ruler down and then finish cutting. Just a couple little cutting tips for y'all. Now, this is another 10-inch strip, so I can use that to do another one after. But let's do the same thing here. We turn it. and we trim the selvage. Now, different manufacturers have different width of selvage. You can see that this art gallery print, the selvage is 1 inch wide, okay? But as long as you still have 40 inches of usable fabric, you should still be able to get those 8 rectangles, okay? So we'll do it again. Real quick. I'll just pop in here because I know the lefties get left out, unfortunately. If you're left-handed, once you trim, well, you would have it like this to trim the selvage, okay? You would then flip it this way and do the same thing. Use my ruler as a template. You would have, you know, your lefty rotary cutter, and you would put this here, and I'm not trying to mess this up, but just to show y'all, and you would place this here, and you would cut your rectangles the exact same way, okay? Just like that, you have 2. Okay, so lefty, you're doing the same thing I'm doing, you're just flip-flopping it to the opposite side. Because I'm right-handed, I'm going to swing it this way and use my righty rotary cutter to, again, just cut, cut, cut. 2, 4, 6, and 1 more is 8. So, I mean, this is like you can put a show on. There's not really a lot of math going on. You're not cutting halves, quarters, 7/8, 5/8, none of that. You literally can just use my ruler, place it on there, use it as a template, cut, 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 cut. And you know that if it's not matching the exact size of this ruler, your measurements are off, right? So just place it and cut. So now we should have 8 like this and 8 like this. And like I said, one of each of these put together, sliced, sewn, will give us a block. All right, so here we go. Oh, awesome. Tracy says she got her Crafty Gemini 5 by 10 inch ruler during the Black Friday sale. Awesome. Yes. Okay, so we're going to grab 1 and 1. Okay. And you're going to place them side by side and then pretty sides touching. Okay, you're sewing that scant 1/4 inch seam allowance down here to connect the 2. So we're going to do that really quick. And I'll show you how you get a 4 patch without needing to have 4 individual squares. We're making the 4 patch, but using the 2 rectangles, okay? So you can put pins if you want to. I feel like I can hold this steady in my hand, no big deal. On this machine, I am setting it to where the needle position here is going to be on 5.0, and that will give me my scant 1/4 inch, okay? So if you need a 1/4 inch foot or however it is that you measure your guide to get that accurate seam allowance, go ahead and do that. And then I'm just going to shorten the stitch length to 2 millimeters in length. I'm not back stitching. If you're not a quilter, you don't know. If you're a quilter, if you know, you know. Because these are all patchwork blocks that are going to have a seam sewn perpendicular across to the one that I'm sewing now, so I don't have to back stitch. Especially with such a tight, short stitch length, even if it's a stitch that's going to be left to the outside, after you quilt the whole thing, you still have to attach binding. So even if it's an outer seam, it's not going to unravel over time because it will be sewn, you know, covered up. Look at me grabbing this lefty one. It will be sewn across it with the binding, you know, and you need the binding to finish off your quilt, okay? So now, I press first just as it was sewn to help set those stitches. Dorothy, great question. The finished size of the block, okay, and listen to the terminology, finished block size is 8 inches by 8 inches. In quilting, when we're designing projects and we say finished, like we give you a finished measurement, that means inside of the quilt done, the block will be 8 inches. Right now, without being sewn to anything else, of course, we still have added seam allowance included on all 4 sides, right? Because it's just a standalone block that's not finished yet. The block itself is finished, but when we say finished, we mean in the quilt. So right now, you should add to whatever that finished measurement is 1/4 inch on all 4 sides. So that means this block right now at this step is 8.5 inches square. Okay, but finished in the quilt, it will be 8 by 8. So I pressed it first as it was sewn. I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to press the seam allowance to the darker fabric. In this project, you're probably going to have to change the direction of the seam allowance a couple times. You'll see why when we start cutting and pressing things, but it's not a big deal. So like this and like this, okay? So now you have 2 rectangles sewn together. You're going to turn it. You're going to take my ruler again, and you're going to measure this way, 5 inches, right? Because the height of our block started off as 10. Where we have shrunk down our dimensions is in the width of each block because we ate up seam allowance here, right? But this should still be 10 inches because we haven't sewn anything to these sides yet. So notice how this is 10 inches still. I want you to turn the ruler so that you're cutting this way at 5 inches. So again, I'm not even measuring, I'm just using the ruler because the ruler is 5 by 10. So I know that the ruler this way is 5 inches. So I'm aligning it here and here. That's it, okay? And you're gonna slice right down the middle. Now if I turn this, there's your 4 patch. Without you needing to have 4 individual 5-inch by 5-inch squares and then sew these 2 and sew these 2 and then put them together, right? So instead you're sewing it and then you slice it and flip it. So here is our 4 patch block. If you're looking for a quick little charity quilt, a baby quilt, and you have yardage and you're just like, you know what? I'm just going to use these 2 fabrics, a light and a dark. You can whip up blocks that are this size, like this, a 4 patch, and throw the whole thing together, okay? Because imagine you cut out a bunch of 5-inch by 10-inch rectangles out of different fabrics. If you had scraps that weren't quite fat quarter sized, you can cut out a bunch. Just literally put my ruler on top, cut around, put the ruler on top, cut around. You'll end up with a bunch that measure like this, and then you can choose a plain light, okay? If say you're using a bunch of different like fun colors, different prints, I Spy fabrics for kid baby quilts. Listen, use your imagination. What you can do with this type of a design is so, I mean, you can go on for days and days and days, okay? Oh good, Lynette says she wants to make a small quilt soon. This would be great to get back into the quilting groove. So now we're gonna just sew these back together. So put it first. I always tell my students, line them up visually the way they need to look when it's completed. And this is a 4 patch block. 1, 2, 3, 4 patches, okay? You're gonna flip one on top of the other with pretty sides touching. And then I'm gonna match up the center seam intersection here. Because I pressed to the dark and I flipped one of them over, the seam allowances should already be going opposite directions because the dark is here and the dark is here, okay? So if you are gonna put a pin, I only really put one right here at that intersection, so I make sure that that key point does not move on me, okay? The rest, we're gonna sew right down here using that scant 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then we have a 4 patch block, and you can leave it at that if you wanted to whip up a quick quilt, do something scrappy, whatever you wanted to do. But I like it because a lot of times we get hung up with like, oh, I need to make like something simple with a 4 patch, but I need to cut out all these 5-inch by 5-inch squares. You don't have to. Oh, and I just, not even thinking, I took a back stitch. I didn't really need it, but no big deal. So we're gonna stitch straight down this way. Before I get to that intersection, I like to like take out the pin, but then I always like lift and make sure that the seam allowance hasn't scooted under and it's coming towards me. So that's where I want the one that's underneath. That's perfect. Keep feeding it through, and that way we ensure that when I open it up and press it, that center intersection of the 4 different squares is perfectly fine. Let's check it and see how good a job I did. First we press as it was sewn, and then we're going to open it up, and I'm just going to press to one side since there's a light and a dark on each side. So that's what I mean. So like right here, once we keep cutting and sewing, you may have to press the seam allowance to a different side than it's automatically going. And if you have a wooden tailor's clapper, take it out so you can flatten all your seams perfectly, okay? All right, so this is a basic 4 patch. This is like a go-to for any beginning quilter, okay? Now, we're making a disappearing 4 patch, which just means that you're going to get rid of the 4 patch, make it disappear, but you started off with it. So we're gonna go from this to this, and as you can see, this one is slightly smaller, okay? But not that much smaller. So I'm going to turn this like this. It don't matter which one, okay? Which way. Because it's gonna be equal measurements from each side, so it'll all be the same. So now I'm gonna measure, let me measure here real quick. 5 1/4. Some people measure 2 1/4. I'm gonna do 2 1/2, just because a lot of us that sew and have things like that, or if you've worked with jelly rolls, you know 2 1/2 is a easy measurement to keep in your mind. So that's what I'm gonna do. So I'm measuring from the outer edge just 2 1/2. And so if you're not familiar with my Crafty Gemini 5" by 10" ruler, let me tell you a little bit of how it works. I have this black dot down here that is to basically get you quickly to recognize what is that zero corner. And the zero corner on a ruler, to me, at least that's what I call it, the zero corner, is like if 0 was here on this bottom corner. That means that going up from there, the numbers increase, and going left from there, the numbers increase. And as you can see, that's the case with this ruler. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then the top edge of the ruler is 10. Okay, and then to the left goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the edge of the ruler is obviously the next inch, 5. 5 inches by 10 inches. So I don't have to be going like this and then recognizing, oh no, it doesn't reach all the way. I got to keep turning the ruler. 2.5. The numbers are not going up this way, so instead you would have to do the backwards math, okay? Lucky for you that the width of this is 5 inches. So if you're using the 2.5-inch measurement, it's going to be 2.5 whether you're measuring from the 5-inch corner or if you're measuring it from what I call my 0 corner, 2.5. Because you can see 1, 2, perfectly 2.5. And so the lines again are nice and thin. The dashed lines, the gap in between the dashed lines allows me to see that edge of the fabric. So I know right there that I have aligned it perfectly on the 2.5-inch. Okay, so I'm lining it up down here along the 2.5-inch line of my ruler, and I don't care really about the top. So I'm going to slice here. Okay, and I'm just going to go like this. If you have a rotating cutting mat, you can do that too. I'm doing the same thing from the opposite side. 2.5. Okay, see that again with my 0 corner down here. Make sure it's straight. Okay, now set these guys aside, and I'm going to turn this one. I'm going to do the same thing, measure 2.5-inch and 2.5-inch and make 2 more cuts here. So that's all you got to think about is using the ruler as a template and then think 2.5 from every side. The same thing to the opposite side. And you can make them narrower if you wanted to tweak the center so it looked a little bit more rectangular versus a square. You can change up the measurements. You can play around, cut 1 inch or 1.5 or 1 3/4. You can play around with the dimensions. Okay, so here we go. These are all the pieces that we have. So we made that 4-patch disappear, and now we're going to put it back together. These are all the pieces you need. Let's notice what we got going on here. This guy is this guy. Okay? This one obviously is not going to get like this. Instead, we're going to turn it. So you have that contrasting dark and light fabric, okay? Same thing here. Swap it. So you can do the middle first so that you have it going toot, 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 stair-stepping kind of like that. And then the sides here, you can decide which way you want it to go. That don't look right to me. I want this corner to have this guy like that. And so then you see how that's different? I mean, you can make your own blocks, right? Because at this point, they're all going to come together however you stitch them up. But this block now is the same as this. Okay? Now, here's one thing that when you are playing around with cut pieces of patchwork blocks and you start swapping them out, you might feel like, oh, wow, look, they're going to come together perfectly. But they won't. They look like that now because they haven't been sewn. These now, because we have both horizontal and vertical seams that need to come together to equal this specific variation of a disappearing 4-patch block, you're going to eat up seam allowances along both dimensions. So, for example, the first part, and this is the usual, I would say a good rule of thumb is when you have blocks that are like this with horizontal and vertical seams that needs to come together, you usually are building it from the inside out, which means we can set aside these outer strips and we need to bring these guys together first, okay? So I'm going to put, again, we did what I just said before, right? Put them visually how they need to go and then flip one on top of the other with pretty sides touching. So this here, the seam allowances are already going opposite directions. I'm going to put a pin right through there, so that'll be good. And then this one we're going to do the same thing, but I'm going to save off on it for now. We'll just pin it here at the machine, okay? Oh, thank you. Belinda says the best ruler I own. I love that. Susie says this is a perfect starter quilt that makes you look like a pro. Agreed. It's just straight seams and they're short. They are short seams, y'all. So if you can cut straight and you can at least, you know, cut out, like I said, the rectangles using my ruler as a template, not just a ruler, you can absolutely make this quilt. All right, so here we go. We're going to piece this guy together first. Again, I'm not backstitching. If you're doing this with a bunch and you're actually working on a full quilt, assembly line style this, okay? You would just go like this and pick up the next one and go and go and go, right? So you can whip up all your blocks in no time. Okay, I'm gonna press after. So let me just trim these threads, and I'm gonna open up. Just by looking at it, even if this got moved around, you should know that it does not go like this, right? It goes like this. So this is another reason I think this block is a great beginner one, because although you may mess up a block here or there, if you have light and dark, it'll pop out and you'll be like, oh wait, that doesn't go there, you know, without having to like be looking at a specific diagram or something. You can tell which one goes where. So same thing for this one. The seam allowances are already going opposite directions. Stop and make sure that I didn't flip this under. Excuse me. Okay. Lori's asking if you can use jelly rolls. I mean, I'm sure there's ways to do it with jelly rolls, but this way is just using, you know, 5" by 10" rectangles. If you were using 5" by 5" squares, you would just combine the 4 and then go into cutting it like I'm showing you here. Excuse me. Oh, awesome. Sylvia says she has 2 of them. I know a lot of you have 2 rulers. I usually have 2 up here because they're great for working with smaller chunks of fabric, trimming things up and all that. And Sylvia says she has 2 as well. She got one for her grandson when he started sewing. That's awesome. All right, so we sewed there. I'm just going to press the seam allowance to one side. If you have a clapper, clap it. Same thing on the other side. And for those that don't know, the wooden clapper, it just helps kind of like absorb the heat of the iron, and the weight of it also helps flatten out the seam. So like if I were to go just like this with the iron, you see, I was about to say sometimes it wants to just pop up, and if I press it and set it with the clapper, you'll see the difference. It doesn't pop up. Okay, so everything is just flatter and crisper. All right, so those first 2 seams got sewn there. So now we need to go back to these guys. Okay, whoop, let me chop these threads. Make sure I don't cut my fabric. So I want to make like a little number 7 here and a little letter L on these corners. So now here's what's going on. Remember that they all matched up before we sewed these. This is what I mean by a block when you have both horizontal and vertical seams. We just ate up seam allowance this way and here. That means that automatically this center unit is going to be smaller than the original length. Okay, so what do y'all think we got to do here? We don't necessarily want to align at the top and then sew, because this intersection here is going to be off. So instead, you're going to line up the center with the line here, the seam that's running here with the center. Like that. So you have a little bit extending past and a little bit extending past. So those little bits are going to be your waist. But that way you end up with everything nice and symmetrical, and all your seams are matching up. Make sense? So don't align from the top, don't align from the bottom, because this seam then will be off. Okay, it'll either be under or over. Put it right in the middle, which makes it pretty easy for you to match up then, right? Because I know here and here needs to be matched up. I put it visually how it needs to look when it's done. Flip one on top of the other. And it's just center seam to center seam. And I got lucky here. My seam intersections are going in the same direction. Where's my pin cushion? Here it is. And I'm just going to put 1 pin. And I put my pin kind of at an angle so that it's going in on one side of the seam and coming out on the other. And that helps me at least ensure that that seam intersection match up there is not going to move. Okay? So we stitch this up. Yes, good. Lynette says that makes sense. That's what I was thinking in my head. Perfect. So you could put a couple more pins here if you wanted to. I'm just going to keep it straight, line up my edges, and I can see from the side here kind of where that fabric underneath starts. You don't need to start stitching up here, because if you do, you're only going to be sewing through 1 layer of fabric, and some machines don't like that. They'll kind of like get jumbled up and you might end up with a thread nest. So just try to start right at, or it could be a little bit in from where the underneath fabric matches up with the top one so that it equals the 2 layers that you need to be sewing through. Okay. And I can feel that my seam allowance moved. So let me make sure that that's nice and flat. There we go. And I'm just going to stitch down this side. Again, stopping to make sure that those intersecting points look good. And I think that this is one where, like, it would be a little bit difficult to have those seam allowance intersections be off. Because if you're measuring with the ruler, using it as a template like I did, if you sew straight and you're cutting it again with the ruler, you know, like there's not a lot of area where you can go wrong. So I think having these intersecting seams matching perfectly here on a block like this, I think works easier than just like cutting a strip, subcutting it, and then, you know, winging each individual cut and hoping that it'll fit. Does that make sense? So I'm going to press it first as it was sewn. Yes, and Susie says it would be perfect for layer cakes too. Absolutely. So here, I'm pressing it, clap it. We're going to turn it. Same thing, okay? Double check and make sure visually this is how I want it to look. Yes. So now, again, here where this intersection is, match it up. And trim this thread. And just one pin. You could put a pin here and here. You know, if you're more of a beginner or you need more help holding the fabric layers because you're not super confident sewing straight and keeping that 1/4 inch seam allowance, then absolutely, you can put as many pins as you want. Okay. Whoop. All right, let's line this up. Again, I'm going to take a quick peek, see where that fabric is underneath. You can also look for it on this side and kind of take the measurement with your eye, like right there, and then start sewing right there, okay? Oop, I want my needle down when it stops. Make sure that seam allowance is going the same way it was before. I got that pin right there at that center intersection, which is key for me. And then that's it. Keep sewing nice and straight down using my guide. And we say scant 1/4 inch because if you're working on a quilt that has specific measurements and cuts of patchwork and all that, that's what the design was based off of. So if you want everything to be the right size or the design of the quilt blocks to look the way the designer intended, then you need to make sure that you're as accurate as possible. On something like this is another reason I think it's a good beginner one, beginner friendly. You could use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Your block is just going to end up being smaller. So you can go with a bigger seam allowance. The key is that you are consistent. Use the exact same seam allowance in every single seam that you sew, and all your blocks are going to be identical. Of course, assuming that you also cut them accurately, right? At the exact size. So that's the thing with quilting. It needs to be precise in terms of consistency is really the key. Because you can make a quilt with a 1/4 inch seam allowance or a chunky 1/4 inch, as long as there's not, you know, measurements of like triangles and things that need to match up based on the size of the seam allowance. But in terms of just coming together with straight seams like this, you can sew it a little bit bigger, or a little bit narrower, but they have to match up. And in order to do that, you got to do whatever you're doing on one, you got to do to all of them, okay? So press, and I'm just pressing these to the outside like I would a border, okay, on a regular block. And then Sylvia says, I started quilting and I find the whole process lots of fun. It's very exciting. Indeed it is. It's just like, it's like a puzzle. It's like little chunks of things coming together. And as you're making it, you're seeing everything come together. You see more color, more shapes, more this, more that. I love it. Love, love, love. All right. So here is our block. And you can see that all we need to do is trim away the excess. Now, before you trim, if you have a big square ruler, you know, that's like a 10 inch or 12.5 inch or even 16 inch, whatever, but like a big square that's not just a rectangle, you can use that to put it on there. I'm just going to use the same, my 5 inch by 10 inch ruler. And I'm going to come over to this side. First, I'm going to measure from here to here. Let me make sure from here to here. Okay, so before I even mess with this, you can see here to here is exactly 8.5 inches. Okay, so before I start trimming, I want to make sure of that. So it should measure the same here too, because we're going to clean off what's sticking out with the center unit. So that center unit, you see how it's the shorter one of all of them? From here to here needs to measure 8.5 before you start hacking at it. Okay, and you can, I mean, it's perfect. Exactly 8.5. Okay, so now I know that I can just take my ruler, line it up down here, and right in line with that center unit. And as long as I don't come in and cut from that center unit, I'm going to be just fine to trim here and here. So I'm aligning this on the right side edge of my ruler. I'm coming in this way, straight here, 8.5 inch at the top. Everything looks perfect. And again, you see that besides cutting those initial strips to cut down my yardage, everything else I do with just the one ruler. We're using it as a ruler, as a template, and then also as a ruler to trim up, to measure and trim. So I'm going to turn it, do the same thing to the other side. Y'all, this is such an easy, beginner-friendly block. Again, 8.5. Right there, looks good. And this is the way I do it because I recommend that you cut both of them at the same time. Sometimes people will go like this, and they'll like cut one, and then they turn it, and they'll cut the other. And so what happens is, because you're cutting 1, 2, 3, and 4 little excess bits off individually, the chances increase that you're like tweaking it, making a little bit too short on one, a little bit longer on the other, and then they don't end up matching perfectly. So that's why I like to just line it up. And because the ruler measures 10 inches long, and we're working on an 8.5 inch square block, it spans the full distance. So you can go this way or this way with the ruler, and you can cut and trim at the same time. How cute. Hello. Even if you just bought yardage of a plain white or a light gray or a baby pink or a baby blue, and then you could have just funky colors and pops of color for these blocks. Now, once you have the blocks done and you make a bunch of blocks, you probably already envisioning it. The way you orient them is going to determine what is that secondary visual design that you're going to get of the quilt top, right? Because this, the way that we piece them, this is just one variation of a disappearing 4-patch, okay? There's other ways that you can start off with that 4-patch and make it disappear and put it back together, making different types of looking blocks, okay? Not just this one, but I really like this one, and it's pretty straightforward. You see how it's going in one angle. So you can use that to create the overall quilt design that you want. So if I go like this, now we have something that's coming in this way. So if we had 2 more this way, it would look like an X made up of these kind of little chain looking pieces, okay? So it's gonna be up to you. But what I like about it is that you can just gather up your lights, gather up your darks. All you need is an equal number of light and dark fabrics, and then just make all the blocks. Then you can just sit there on your design wall and just play around, scoot them around. Oh, we have too much blue on this side. Let me put some green and purple over here. Move the orange and pink ones there. And you can make the funnest, scrappiest quilt that's pretty much mindless, okay? Just remember that. 1 light rectangle with 1 dark rectangle equals 1 block. Okay? This equals this with, I already tossed it in the trash, but barely any waste. And you saw it, right? It was just what we trimmed from the 4 corners. So for yardage use, if you have 20 inch or more by the width of fabric, like 20 inches or more, unfortunately, like having a half of a yard, you know, you're not going to be able to get 2 full 10-inch strips, but you could turn a fat quarter over and cut some pieces out along the 22-inch way that way. You won't be able to get 8, obviously, because it's not the full width, but you'll still be able to get some decent size, you know, rectangles from each print. Especially if you're making a scrappy one, I would say use it. You know, if you have just a 20-inch by the width of the fabric or even some fat quarters, you don't need to have a ton of just the one color if you want to make it a scrappy quilt that features a bunch of different prints, okay, and designs. Yes, Sylvia says, I like doing this and moving them around. Absolutely. It's super fun to orient them on a design wall and see, hey, which way do I want them going? And you can play around with it. Let's see. Yes, Dorothy, it is a nice and easy pattern. Let's see. Oh, good. Kat says, I learned the scant 1/4 inch from you, and I'm so thankful. I was always told to sew a 1/4 inch with a 1/4 inch presser foot, but my pieces were always smaller than the instructions. So if you are somebody who's getting into quilting, or you're a quilter and maybe you stopped because your blocks weren't ever turning out the right size, if your blocks were always smaller, that means that your seam allowance assuming you cut accurately, that your seam allowance is likely bigger than what we talked about here, which is a scant 1/4 inch. So I recommend that you check out my YouTube videos that I have on tips for sewing a scant 1/4 inch. So just go to youtube.com and type in the words Crafty Gemini. That way it'll pull up my specific videos. Just type in Crafty Gemini scant 1/4 inch seam allowance or scant 1/4 inch and the videos will pop up. Because one of the things that you need to keep in mind is the fold, this right here. So even if I sew from here to here at exactly a 1/4 inch, what we're not accounting for is the width, the thickness of the thread that we're using, and the width this way of the stitches. You might think it's not much, but it's something, okay? That little bit plus when you press over here, you know that that fabric as it rolls over is not completely flat because it has the bulk of a seam allowance underneath. So there's a little bit also being taken up by the fold just to get the fabric to come over this way. So think about it. If you're sewing a true 1/4 inch, where from the edge of your fabric to where your stitches are is a 1/4 inch, by the time you account for the width of the thread of the stitch and that little bit of fabric that stays right there as you fold it over, no matter how flat you try and press this, okay, it's going to be bigger than the 1/4 inch, right? Because it was a 1/4 inch like this. But this is not how we have a quilt or how we have a block inside of a quilt. So that's why we say a scant 1/4 inch, which is basically sewing, I would say maybe 2 to 3 threads of the fabric narrower than a 1/4 inch. So that those 2 to 3 threads are one, the width this way of your thread, of your stitches, and then a little bit more for the fabric here. So that's why you saw mine ended up at exactly 8.5 inches square. It wasn't shorter and it wasn't bigger because my seam allowance was a scant 1/4 inch and I gave myself a little bit of allowance there for the width of the thread stitch itself and the fold over of the fabric. So if you make one of these and you go to measure and your stuff measures 8.25 or 8 inches, that's where it's probably at, okay? If you cut everything accurately, it's because your seam allowance is too chunky. All right, so have a look at that video that I have on YouTube. I think I have a couple where I give you those tips and we talk all about that. And I give you an exercise for you to do so that you can test it and see exactly where you need to have your needle position be so that you can get the perfect scant 1/4 inch on your patchwork projects. All right. Dorothy, are you calling me out? She says, what thread are you sewing with? I'm using a wonderful polyester thread that I had in here from Pouches because we were using the sewing machines last week with the kids I was teaching. These are just sample blocks, no worries. But I would use 100% cotton. Okay, if you're making a quilt with cotton fabric, that's what I prefer to use. Just make sure, remember we're talking about the allowance here for the thickness of the stitch itself. If you're using a thread that you've been using forever and you never change threads, make sure that you check the weight of that thread. I would recommend sewing with a 50 weight cotton or even a 60 weight cotton if you can get your hands on it, okay? The higher the weight number, the thinner the thread is. So if you look at your spool that you're using and you're like, yeah, it's cotton, and you look and it says 30 weight, that's way too thick for piecing. I mean, you could use it, but you definitely need to then deduct the chunkiness of that thread from the seam allowance. I would use that type of a thread better for top stitching, decorative stitching, for things that you're going to see exposed, not just adding such a thick yarn. It's almost yarn, no. Using such a thick thread in a seam allowance. The quilt itself is going to be so much chunkier, like these seams won't sit super flat. It's just going to be a little bit too big. If you want your blocks to lie nice and flat, you want to go with a thinner thread. I know people that stitch up their patchwork units with even finer thread. Usually thinner than a 60 weight. I haven't seen a cotton in thinner than a 60 weight, but I know some people use like an 80 weight or even 100 weight polyester thread because polyester is a synthetic, it's a man-made fiber. Those threads can be super, super thin and still be very strong. So I know people that piece their quilts like that, but you know, some people are more purist and only use 100% cotton, which is fine. Whatever thread you want to use, just know that if you look at the thread weight of yours, your favorite, make sure that you're accounting for the thickness of that thread in here, okay? But I would recommend like a 50 weight cotton. A Wonderful confetti is usually what I use, or Aurifil is also a really nice fine weight. Aurifil thread says it's 50 weight, but when I compare it to other 50 weight cottons, I feel like it's even thinner, so it's really nice and thin, allows those seams to be nice and flat. Okay, so look into those if you're kind of looking to, you know, try a different thread for your patchwork piecing. Okay. All right, let's see. I'm using an Egyptian cotton thread and it's not breaking, but the thread is in pieces on the spool. Oh my gosh, that's horrible. That sounds like a manufacturing issue. For it to be broken on the spool. What a nightmare. It wouldn't even come off in one full thing. I would go nuts. All right. Yes, so Susie says for practice, I would draw the 1/4 inch line with a pencil and sew on it. Yes, so I have a little exercise for y'all like that in the video that I'm talking about on my YouTube channel with some tips on how to sew a scant 1/4 inch. And you have to do it for your machine. Then just put like a little Post-it on your machine that tells you what settings to set everything to. And Tracy's asking if there's a place to look somewhere for different machines for the position of the needle for seams. Example, I have a Janome and know what the 1/4 inch, but not any of the other allowances are. Yeah, you have to test it out. So like measure it, like we said, with a ruler, and then set the settings and scoot your needle over, like adjust the stitch width on a straight stitch setting, and see what setting you need to have that needle at so that it stitches just inside of that 1/4 inch line. Okay, great. I'm glad, Sylvia. She says, thank you for all your tips. They've helped me so much. Well, I am happy that they help. And I hope you guys give this block a try, okay? If you need to get your hands on the Crafty Gemini 5-inch by 10-inch ruler, we have the link in the description box below. We have them still on sale currently. I think the next batch, the price will be going up since we'll need to manufacture a whole nother batch of rulers. So if you do want to grab one, use the link below and go ahead and order yours, and you'll be able to use it for all your different cut-in projects and obviously to make this one. So thanks again for tuning in, everybody. I hope you learned something and that you'll give this block a try. If you do, make sure to use the hashtag CraftyGemini. You can even tag me on Facebook or Instagram so I can see what fabrics you used to make your little disappearing 4-patch block. And I hope y'all enjoy the rest of your week. I will see y'all in the next video, and all the links for everything I talked about today is always in the description box below or in the caption if you're watching us on Facebook. So thanks again, everybody, and I will see y'all in the next one.